Who knew what and when? It's an age-old question, but it is the question now on the table in front of the British government so far as British public opinion is concerned. I want to deal with when first, because when has everything to do with just how culpable our governors are to the theft of Christmas, the scrapping of Christmas, the destruction of Christmas. Not just Christmas, but all the millions of plans that were laid. Well, there's two different stories. It depends who you believe. There's Valence from the scientists, or there's Mike Hancock, the health minister. Tony Hancock, I call him. I call him other things, but I can't on air. Listen to what both of them said, not 24 hours apart. Chris.
So the new variant was first thought to have occurred sometime in mid-September in London or Kent, and by the middle of November, about 28% or so of the cases in London and the southeast, and slightly lower in the east of England, were due to the new variant. So it had grown rapidly. By the week commencing the 9th of December, these figures were much higher. So in London, over 60% of all the cases were the new variant.
On Friday, when we were presented with that new scientific evidence about the new variant, it was our duty to act. And you know, from being presented on Friday afternoon with just the strength of how easy this new variant finds it to transmit from one human to another, we acted very quickly and decisively.
Well, who's lying and why? It is not, surely, remotely credible that the chief medical officer knew of a new variant of the coronavirus 19 in September, but Britain's health minister didn't know about it until Friday afternoon. Why is that important? Because that means the government didn't need to have told us on Wednesday of last week that it would be, and I quote the Prime Minister, inhuman to cancel Christmas, only 3 days before actually cancelling Christmas. And it cannot be because of a new variant, a mutation of the virus, because if it were, we would have locked down last September, or last October, or last December, not a couple of days before Christmas. So which one of these august individuals, well, one of them is august, and I tend to believe him. Valence says September. Hancock says Friday. Who do you believe? Who's responsible for this catastrophe? London yesterday experienced the first mass evacuation of the population of London since the Second World War. You couldn't get into the railway stations because the government gave a few hours' notice that after midnight you will not be allowed to leave London, neither enter it. France has now banned all travellers from Britain. The Channel Tunnel is closed. 1 million, 10 million, 20 million Christmas dinners have just been ruined. Families that had been apart for more or less the entirety of this year thought that they were coming together for 5 days for a Christmas reunion until they weren't at a couple of hours' notice. Who is responsible in government? You see, in the United States, which has performed even worse than we have performed, although both of us are the two worst performing in the entire world. Just contemplate that for a minute. the United States and Great Britain that go around the world invading and occupying other people's countries, that are never done telling other people how they've got to run their countries, how unacceptable their governance is. We are the two worst countries on the earth, both run by blonde idiots, one the most educated fool in Christendom, and the other, well, at least he has the alibi of literally being an uneducated idiot. These two men have given away trillions, capital T, trillions of dollars and pounds to the corporate sector. In the case of the United States, was giving their own public one payment of $1,200 right at the beginning of this pandemic. How have people lived? How can you possibly live on one payment of $1,200 at the same time as Trump threw $3 trillion to keep the stock market up, to keep the corporations' bellies full long enough to get re-elected? It didn't even work. But we found £3 trillion here in Britain after a decade and more of austerity, when we were told there was no magic money tree. We had to live grinding year after year after year after year after year of poverty because of austerity, because we had to balance the books. We found $3 trillion also. In fact, some of that is one of the reasons why we're now having no Christmas dinner, because we were told to eat out to help out, and the government paid for half your dinner. Half of your dinner was paid for by the taxpayer to stampede people into restaurants where they infected each other with coronavirus, and now look where we are. But most of the money, as it took the New York Times to tell us, so much for British journalism, huh? They came over from New York to investigate the expenditure of the British government during the time of the coronavirus. And guess what? They found that at least half of the British government's expenditure had been given either to friends and cronies of the Conservative Party, or oftentimes both, or to companies with no experience and no track record in the field that they were being given billions of taxpayer pounds to spend. So I said this to you many months ago. I'm going to say it now with emphasis. I will not rest until these people are on trial. Never mind voting them out. They should be on trial for grand larceny of the public purse, for mass killing by corporate manslaughter of scores of thousands of British people that didn't need to die, but died because of the state of our health service, of the state of our care system, and of the stampeding out of old people out of the hospitals into care homes where there wasn't so much as a paper mask for the staff or the people we were sending in there. Many of them already infected by the coronavirus, being pushed into a care home like a chemical device, like a chemical weapon, a biological weapon, sent in amongst the most vulnerable, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our elderly parents, were killed by the callous incompetence of the people that are paid to represent us. And with almost silence from those that are paid to report on how government is doing. In Scotland as well as in England. But in Scotland, it's even worse. Nicola Sturgeon has just made a grand pronunciamento that no one can come into Scotland, even though there is no border between Scotland and England. And Scotland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. Even though the Act of Union itself described us as inseparable, indissoluble, she's banned people from going into Scotland. Well, everyone, I can assure her, except me, because I'll be driving across your non-existent border tomorrow. Count on it. And you will not stop me. But her mentality is, and the mentality of her knuckle-dragging supporters is, keep out the English, but Scotland is doing worse than England, worse than Boris Johnson. Imagine that. Whilst every liberal journalist and commentator in England has constantly pumped out the precise opposite of the truth, that Scotland is doing worse than England. As a matter of fact, given we have only 5 million people in Scotland, and our country is truly vast, taking into account the density of our population, we should have been one of the best in Europe. But actually, we are the worst in Europe. They're always telling you to look at Denmark, but Denmark has done 10 times better than Scotland on the coronavirus. So who's going to pay for the catalogue of incompetence, for the killings in the care homes, for the catastrophe of the PPE shortage, for the failure to learn anything from their own mass exercise just a couple of years ago? An exercise predicated on an outbreak of a coronavirus. Who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for the catastrophe in the hospitality sector, where you can, until today, you could ram in your thousands into a shop, but you could not sit in carefully controlled, coronavirus compliant pubs and restaurants? What's the logic of that? What's the thinking behind that? Who's going to pay for all the destroyed small and medium-sized businesses that this catastrophe and its mishandling have cost? Because one thing will not be acceptable to Britain's small and medium enterprise sector, to Britain's middle class, is that all these small and middle-sized businesses go bust and are then bought up at fire sale prices by the biggest corporate interests who've been bankrolled, fantastically bankrolled by the state throughout this crisis. We have changed the order of business tonight. Coming up first is the MOATS medic, Dr. Ranjit Brar, because for us in Britain and now in Europe, this is the big story of the hour. It's the mother of all talk shows, all right.